Has Russia just threatened a NATO member at the United Nations? Listen to this.
Membership in NATO will not protect you from retaliation, even if you're a member of NATO.
All right, that's Russia's UN ambassador at the UN Security Council meeting, and he is directing his message to Latvia, a Baltic country and NATO member. He said Ukraine is planning to launch drone strikes on Russia from Latvian territory. So let's listen to more of his speech leading up to that threat.
I would like to draw attention to all of those who are helping Kyiv to carry out terror attacks on the territory of the Russian Federation and tell them that contemporary intelligence means that we can clearly identify drone launch sites. Furthermore, data can be obtained by studying drone wreckage when Zelensky's government made an attempt to attack the Russian president's residence in December. A reciprocal attack will be unavoidable. And yes to the permanent representative of Latvia. The foreign intelligence of Russia did say that the coordinates of decision-making centers in Latvia are well known, and membership in NATO will not protect you from retaliation, even if you are a member of NATO.
All right, so Russia says it would hit what it calls decision-making centres in Latvia. If it did decide to hit a NATO member, it would pull all NATO members into Russia's war with Ukraine, triggering the alliance's Article 5. Now, at the same UN Security Council meeting, Latvia hit back at the threat and said the claims were totally false.
This is pure fiction and pure lies, and I will not abuse of the Council members' time in detail debunking these lies. You will receive that in writing. I will just repeat: lies and aggressive disinformation and threats are a sign of despair and weakness. And we have seen similar lies addressed against other members of this council in the previous meetings. So I'm very honored to have the attention drawn to my country today. Thank you.
Well, Ukraine has also denied Russia's claims, and they're central to this story. And we need to peel back the layers with our guest, Eugene Rumer. He is the director of the Russia and Eurasia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace think tank, and was previously the National Intelligence Officer for Russia and Eurasia at the US National Intelligence Council. Eugene, great to have you on today. What was your first reaction to Russia's threat to Latvia?
Well, my first reaction was and still is that it is part and parcel of a long record of Russian provocations intended to destabilize, unnerve, put on edge its Baltic neighbors, all of whom are small, all of whom are in NATO. And it's also a test of NATO's resolve and ability to come to, at least for now, rhetorically, to the rescue, the help of these Baltic countries. The Russians have been testing, provoking its neighbors for a long time now with airspace violations. Just last September, Russian aircraft penetrated Estonian airspace and remained in Estonian airspace for 12 minutes. So this is all intended to keep them on edge and also to distract the attention from what really is happening, and that is Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine that is not going well. So it's an attempt to both undermine the cohesion of the Western alliance, but also to present to the Russian public the image of Russia as being attacked from the West.
All right, so plenty of things there to break down, but should Latvia take this very seriously, and NATO too? Should they really be concerned with this threat? Do you see it as a sort of an escalation of sorts?
I don't see it necessarily as an escalation just because there's a long history of Russian provocations like this one. But I do consider the threat from Russia to its Baltic neighbors as a serious threat. Now, it is in some ways reassuring to think that for as long as Russia is tied down with its war against Ukraine, it will not attempt an aggression or some kind of a more violent provocation against one of its Baltic neighbors. But I would say that this is not something that I would bet on necessarily. Putin has a long record of doubling down when he's on the back foot, and which he is now in Ukraine, and trying to provoke something with the Baltic countries. Now, also, don't forget that all of these countries, in particular Latvia and Estonia, have sizable ethnic Russian populations. And the Russians have been exploiting that fact to their advantage, presenting these Russian populations as being oppressed by the governments of these countries, being denied their basic rights, and have tried to stir up discontent among these populations to kind of get them mobilized against their governments. And that's a real threat, I think.
Yeah, it's certainly deeply concerning, obviously, for those Baltic states. Before we get on to sort of what's been happening with Ukraine in greater detail, I just want to stick with this this situation that we saw with in the UN, and the deputy US ambassador told that meeting of the UN Security Council that Washington would stick to its NATO commitment. So essentially, is this a great amount of reassurance as well for the US's European partners, of course, in NATO?
Well, it is certainly reassuring to hear senior American diplomats say that at the Security Council. But at the same time, the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, General Grinkiewicz, today announced that the United States will be gradually reducing its military presence in Europe. The United States just announced a withdrawal of one combat brigade from Europe, going down to 3 from 4. So it is certainly unnerving to our European allies, and certainly unnerving to the frontline states like Latvia, when the United States' commitment to NATO and to defending the frontline states is, let's just say, not as solid as it used to be.
Right. Now, Eugene, we've been talking a lot about Latvia and the Baltic states. It's probably a good time to just remind our viewers as well a little bit about sort of the position, of course, of these Baltic states. We're familiar with them, but it's always good to bring in a map, I think. And, you know, the Baltic states are 3 countries in northeastern Europe. You've got Estonia, you've got Latvia and Lithuania, and they're former Soviet republics, and nowadays fierce supporters of Ukraine. Now, in recent months, we've been seeing Ukrainian drones entering the airspace of these Baltic countries, NATO members, of course, and the latest incident being reported from Estonia, where a Romanian F-16 shot down a Ukrainian drone. Now, of course, Romania is also a member of NATO. So my question to you, Eugene, is just for our viewers, why would a NATO jet shoot down a Ukrainian drone in Estonia?
Well, first of all, the Ukrainian drone in Estonia was probably due to a mistake. You know, these are highly sophisticated weapons, but, you know, they do sometimes stray, of course. That's one. 2, the Romanian jet in Estonia is part of NATO's Baltic Air Patrol that has been going on for years, well over a decade, I believe. So it's a symbol and tangible manifestation of the Allies' support for the Baltic countries, for their sovereignty, for the inviolability of their territorial integrity and their airspace. So this is part of kind of the normal NATO presence, and these aircraft rotate there. I don't know exactly how long each rotation is. Sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes maybe a year, but it's part of the normal pattern of operations for NATO to show the resolve to support the Baltic members.
All right, now, how are these, say, incursions affecting Baltic countries? Because in Latvia, they essentially caused the government to crumble just days ago, right?
Right. So I would say, it is probably an overreaction. The fact that that drone ended up in Latvia and Latvian air defenses were not able to shoot it down in time. But again, it's really, playing into the Russians' hands because it seems to kind of distract the attention from the real threat, which is from Russia, to the would-be alleged threat from Ukraine, whereas the threat from Ukraine really to the Baltic countries is non-existent.
Right, I want to just mention that as well, because Ukraine says that the airspace incidents are because Russia is causing their drones to enter NATO territory, i.e. these Baltic states, by using electronic warfare. Now, firstly, can you explain to us what electronic warfare is and why would Russia want drones to enter NATO territory, according to Ukraine?
Well, electronic warfare is something that the Russians engage in. It's creating, it's been one of their kind of fortes for many, many years. It's a way to interfere with navigation of various weapon systems that rely on satellite navigation. They've also done this form of, call it, I guess, hybrid radio electronic warfare by interfering with aircraft, civilian aircraft around European airports. Basically, it's jamming certain frequencies. It's kind of creating false coordinates for aircraft that are following, they're relying on these navigational systems to guide them to a different direction. It's common, for example, if you're in Moscow, and if you're looking at the map of Moscow, I mean, I haven't been there in a while, quite a while, but it used to be the case that when you were in central Moscow, the map that showed up on your phone would tell you that you were somewhere 20, 30 kilometers away from downtown Moscow where you actually were. So it's a way, it's just a kind of a protective measure that the Russian security services implement around the center of the capital. Now, why would they want Ukrainian drones to end up in Latvian airspace? Well, precisely to create this false image of Ukraine posing threat to the Baltic countries, of Ukraine being an irresponsible actor in the European security, and distract the attention from what Russia is doing in Ukraine.
All right, now, Ukraine is stepping up its drone attacks against targets deep inside Russia. So let's take a look at this map, which is showing these drone strikes, just so we can really kind of understand it. Now, energy facilities hit by Kyiv include oil refineries and gas processing plants. Ukraine has also struck ports on the Baltic and Black Seas, hitting oil terminals, pumping stations, tankers. And reports say that some of the sites have been forced to shut operations due to damage caused by the attacks. Now, Eugene, Ukraine has recently been attacking, as I've just mentioned, this Russian energy infrastructure. So how much does this hurt Russia?
Well, it hurts. It doesn't hurt enough yet to force Putin to really sit down and negotiate in earnest. Certainly undercuts Russian revenue from oil exports. Of course, I should add that the war with Iran helps Russian exports, drives up the price of oil, and the United States Treasury just temporarily, again, lifted sanctions on Russian oil exports. But I think these strikes are having gradually and undeniably a psychological effect. And it's not only the oil export facilities that really matter, but the fact that, for example, a few days ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, Ukrainian drones struck a city in the Urals, which is way, way deep inside Russia, Yekaterinburg. Now, it wasn't a major strike, but it's a reminder to the citizens of Russia that really no place in Russia is safe anymore. There was another strike a few days before that in the city of Samara. Now, what some listeners or viewers may connect it to is the record of the history of World War II. In 1941, when German armies were approaching Moscow, the Soviet government evacuated to the city then known as Kuibyshev. Now it's known as Samara. Now it is within striking distance of Ukrainian drones. During World War II, it was the safe place where Stalin's government found itself to be, hiding out, running away from German armies. So it just gives you a sense of sort of insecurity that prevails in many Russian cities, and I believe it's having psychological impact on the Russian population.
Right, well, let's hear the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, because he says that Kyiv's new strategy could actually change the course of the war. And we'll listen to him, and then we'll be back to you in a second, Eugene.
We are bringing Russia's war of aggression back home, to the only place it came from. Everyone sees our entirely justified responses to Russian terror and to every strike against Ukraine. And we are increasing the scale of our responses. There was a time when dozens of Ukrainian drones striking Russia was considered a major event. Now, hundreds of our long-range weapons every day are no longer sensational, though they are always welcome news.
All right, so we just heard Volodymyr Zelensky there. How vulnerable is Russia to Ukrainian drone strikes, Eugene?
Well, just a few days ago, Ukrainian drones struck Moscow, the most heavily defended city in the country. And if Russian air defenses cannot stop those large-scale attacks, then it sort of tells you. Now, it's a huge country, and it would be difficult for Ukraine to really scale up its attacks beyond what it has been able to accomplish so far. But I think it does point to a very serious vulnerability over time as Ukraine builds up its arsenal of long-range strike weapons. It sends a message to the Russian public. In a sense, the message to the Kremlin that we, Ukrainians, after what we went through this past winter when the country was bombarded day in, day out, and the country's infrastructure was destroyed by Russian drones and missiles, we're prepared to go all in. And I think it's an important message.
Now, despite the fact that, Ukraine has been striking deep into Russia, the UN says the war in Ukraine is becoming deadlier by the day, and we've seen barrages of strikes on Ukraine, many deaths and injured, and now these threats from Latvia too, from Russia. Are we in new territory, as in, has the war escalated, do you think?
Yes, there are essentially two wars going on. One is happening on the battlefields in eastern Ukraine. And that war, by all accounts, is mostly stalemated. The movement on the ground has really been very, very small. But the war has acquired a different quality, and it's a war of long-range strikes, whereas previously Russia was able to dominate in that contest. Ukraine now is stepping up and is able to deliver the strikes and the message to the Kremlin that it wasn't previously able to deliver. And I think that really counts for a lot. It is definitely, in my view, an escalation, a long and much needed escalation on the part of Ukraine. We'll see whether Putin really comes to his senses and decides that he has to now sit down and negotiate in earnest. I don't know, but it is certainly an escalation. I would say yes.
All right, Eugene, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Eugene Rumer, Carnegie's Carnegie's Russia and Eurasia programme. Really great to get your insights and your analysis, Eugene, and take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me.
All right, time for you to send us in your comments and questions. What do you make of the Russian threat against Latvia, a country with the force of NATO behind it? Let us know in the comments, and always hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. I'm Pablo Foley-Elias in Berlin. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.